From the Radio Cafe and the Quivira Coalition, this is Down to Earth, the Planet to Plate podcast. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. And before we start today's show, we want to ask for your support. The best way to support the Quivira Coalition is by becoming a member. Right now, when you join or renew, your membership helps the coalition access a $20,000 matching grant from the Paul H. Johansson Foundation. Any donation between now and the 1st of September will be matched dollar for dollar by this generous grant opportunity. The funds will go toward land health workshops, developing tribal partnerships, and the new agrarian apprenticeship program. Visit Quivira's website to give today, quiviracoalition.org. That's Quivira coalition.org. And we also want to let you know that the Quivira Coalition and the New Mexico Coalition for Working Lands invite you to join their weekly community resilience chats every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time. This is a casual Zoom space to meet with other producers and regenerative ag stakeholders and supporters. Kick back for as much time as you can spare, throw together a lunch or a refreshing beverage, and chat with other farmers, ranchers, and regenerative ag stakeholders in a stimulating and supportive space. Chats will center around a different theme each week. We look forward to chatting together next Tuesday. To register, email support@nmcewl.org. That's support@nmcewl.org. And now to our program. I'm very happy now to welcome Dianna Martin. She's Director of Communications and Marketing at the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary Charlotte, for having me on the show.
So I read a piece that you wrote on foodtank.com, which is kind of a food think tank. And in that piece, you talked about some of the early impacts, this was a couple of months ago, of the COVID-19 pandemic on agriculture. Now it's a few months later. What kinds of impacts are you seeing in small and mid-sized farms, especially regenerative and organic farms?
Yeah, I might start with some of the observations on the consumer side. Since I work in marketing, a lot of times consumer trends are something that I keep a really close eye on. And it's been a really, really interesting year with consumer behaviors. One thing that we've seen is the coronavirus pandemic has been really eye-opening for the average consumer who tend to be very removed from food. A lot of people kind of think food comes from the grocery store. They're not involved in agriculture. A lot of people live in urban areas, have never even stepped foot on a farm. And what we saw during the coronavirus pandemic is, people went to grocery stores and they really saw food wiped out. And I think that was a wake-up call for a lot of people and was actually scary for a lot of people and got people to stop and think really for the first time about where does this food come from and who's producing it? How am I going to get the food I need to keep my family safe and healthy during a pandemic? And I think it helped people realize that our industrial food system is more vulnerable than they thought it was. We just have this idea of bounty and abundance in our country, and a lot of people don't know that there's been so many red flags and weak links in our industrial food system. So some of the things we saw with consumers this year in response to coronavirus was, number one, just a real importance of health. Consumers became really focused this year on purchasing healthy food that supports their immune systems, food that had health claims, and also organic food. So we've seen a pretty sizable increase in organic sales so far this year. Organic produce sales were up 20% this spring, just over last year. So people are really searching out organic, partially because, consumers believe that organic is healthier, but also because they believe that organic is safer, that there's more traceability in the supply chain, and that's been something that consumers are looking for. Some of the other trends we've seen are people want less people handling their food and a shorter supply chain. So we're seeing a lot more direct-to-consumer sales. One way we're seeing that is just a huge increase in people signing up for CSA shares. which is something I've been really excited about because there's nothing better than actually meeting your local farmer, going to a farm, making that connection with local healthy food. And interestingly enough, another trend we've seen with consumers this spring has been gardening, people actually growing their own food. And I think some of that comes from people spending more time at home, cooking at home, looking for activities to do with their children who might be home from school. And some of that does have to do with just this idea of safety and less people handling their food, less trips to the grocery store. So those are some things we're seeing on the consumer side, which I think actually these trends, we're seeing that they're going to have staying power. We're already seeing now some polling that's saying that this is causing a long-term shift in buying habits, and that consumers are even in the future are going to think more about health, buying direct from farmers, and also are more concerned now about the impact of their food choices on the planet. So that's a little bit about what we've seen with consumers. I'm also happy to talk a little bit more about what our farmers have been experiencing this spring. As you can imagine, the coronavirus pandemic has been just a massive shift for how farmers need to do business. We are seeing that farmers are really innovating this year, and farmers are really having to shift everything about how they do business, how their employees work, how they go to market, what their consumers want. So it's been a very challenging growing season for farmers. I would say, one of the bright spots are we're seeing that organic farmers are faring better than their conventional counterparts. Part of that is the demand for organic. Part of that is a lot of organic farmers tend to be more diverse, so they're growing more diverse crops for more diverse markets, which helps in times of uncertainty and as things are shifting. A lot of organic farmers, for example, maybe already had a direct-to-consumer outlet like a CSA, and they were able to shift sales that they traditionally did to restaurants or farmers markets or institutions like schools that shut down for coronavirus by increasing their CSA shares. It's been all about innovation and pivoting. I've spoken to farmers that, for example, had a farm-to-table restaurant that had to shut down their restaurant for coronavirus, but turned it into a farm store and, a grocery store for the community for people to come out and buy groceries. So there's definitely been a lot of shifting in how farmers do business, but, organic farming has been a bright spot in the coronavirus pandemic. Flexibility has been key, direct to consumer has been key, and just having those diversified markets have really been key for farmers to respond to the pandemic. But there's definitely also been a lot of challenges with how do you keep your workers safe? And there's also been a lot of challenges with just getting labor, because so many farmers rely, for example, on H-2A workers who many which come from the global south, come from either Central America or Mexico. And because of coronavirus and shutting down people coming into our country, it's also impacted farmers' ability to get labor in a very difficult year.
Have smaller farmers and organic farmers and regenerative farmers and so on, have they been getting the bailout support that large agriculture is getting in the face of the pandemic?
So there are federal farmer relief funds. It's called the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. Essentially, the federal government put aside actually a pretty sizable amount of funding, $1.5 billion, to support farmers in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Those funds are being handled by the USDA, and the USDA has been given pretty much blanket discretion to decide how those funds get allocated. One of our fears has been traditionally USDA funds, most of them end up at the largest farms and the farms that are the most profitable. And there has been some early reporting. The USDA is starting to put out some reporting about what they've done with those coronavirus relief funds. And they're following similar trends that we tend to see with USDA funding, that the largest chunk of funds are going to industrial livestock producers. That's actually the number one area that's gotten coronavirus relief funds. $676 million has gone just to livestock producers. The second largest area that those funds have gone to are row crop farmers. So a lot of these farms are ending up in, especially the Midwest, conventional and large industrial farms. Following the livestock and row crop, the next largest set of funds have gone to dairy producers. The smallest amount of funds have gone to specialty crop producers, which are, fruits, vegetables, nuts. Only $25 million has been allocated to specialty crop producers. One of our biggest concerns about that is, a number of people, including some of our senators who have, like Shelley Pingree, who is a great advocate for regenerative and organic farmers. She's really pushed the USDA to make sure that these funds benefit local producers who are actually providing food for their community. In a lot of ways, those producers have been most affected by not being able to be at a farmer's market or school shutting down, restaurants shutting down. They also are providing that nutrient-dense food and food in local communities that make us resilient for these type of pandemics. So one of our concerns is that those producers will not get those funds. And I think that fear is in the reporting that's come out so far is what's coming to light about who is getting those funds, but the USDA hasn't disclosed a lot of data about really any other demographics about the farms who are getting the funding, including things like the size of those farms. So we know more about what type of farms they're going to than necessarily the size of the farms.
Very interesting. I mean, as you said, people are waking up now to the vulnerability of our food system during COVID, having, for many people, seeing empty shelves for the first time in their lives. And this is something that you've been looking at for a long time at Rodale. One of the things that's so interesting about what you do is you've got this long-term comparison going on where you farm one area in a quote-unquote conventional way and the other in organic and regenerative ways. Tell us about that project and what you found.
Absolutely. So for anyone who's not familiar with Rodale Institute, we've actually been around for 70 years. We're a nonprofit that focuses on organic and regenerative farming research, education with farmers, especially farmers who want to transition to organic practices. And we also do consumer education. But what we're most well known for is our research. We actually have the longest running side-by-side trial in North America comparing organic and conventional practices. And that's known as our farming systems trial. We've been doing the farming systems trial, we've been doing this research for almost 40 years. We started that trial back in 1981. And in that trial, we compare organic versus conventional grain cropping systems. So, corn, soybeans are part of that rotation. And we focused that research on grains because about 70% of U.S. agriculture is grain production. Actually, 50% of what we grow in this country is just corn and soybeans. So we started that research. We wanted to learn more about what are the differences in organic and conventional production on things like soil health, yields, profitability for the farmer, how much energy do they use, water do they use, and now we actually are even looking more at human health data. So what are the difference in, for example, nutrition of those projects, of those different types of growing practices? So that's some of the research that we do at Rodale Institute. We have that trial in grains. We have actually a newer trial called the Vegetable Systems Trial, where we compare organic versus conventional produce. And we're looking at that in a number of different crops. So that research has been very eye-opening, I think, for people around the world. One of the things we found, there's this kind of common misconception that organic can't feed the world, that organic has lower yields. And the farming systems trial has actually proven that after a period of transition, organic and conventional have statistically similar yields. When we actually see differences are years when we have inclement weather like drought or flooding. Our organic system has up to 40% higher yields. So a lot of that just has to do with the resiliency of organic and regenerative farming practices. The healthier soil can retain water, the microbial community in that soil can support the plants during times of stress. You have that symbiotic relationship between the soil and the soil organisms like the bacteria and fungi in the plant. So that research has really shown that we found from that research organic is more profitable for farmers. Right now we're seeing organic grain production is 6 to 9 times more profitable than conventional farming. We've seen the yields are statistically similar. And then, of course, we've seen the environmental outcomes that you would expect. We've seen the organic systems have increased soil organic matter when the conventional systems have really remained the same or depleted.
So that's huge. And when you talk about grain production, I mean, so much of that grain is going to feed livestock. Is that right?
Yeah, so we've been sold this idea that we need conventional and industrial and chemical agriculture to feed the world. But actually, most of what we grow in the United States, that 50% of those corn and soybeans that make up U.S. agriculture, most of that is grown in a conventional chemical way, GMO crops with herbicide, pesticides. Most of what that gets turned into are either grain for livestock, and mostly that's grain for conventional livestock in controlled animal feeding operations or CAFOs, either animal grain, ethanol, or basically high fructose corn syrup that turns into cheap processed food that now makes up the bulk of the standard American diet.
Which in itself is problematic, and that's something that you're also studying in some depth.
Yeah, it's a really interesting year with, talking about the pandemic has really put health on people's minds. And I think one thing we just want to use this opportunity to do as a country is to talk about health. And health is so much more than being vulnerable to a virus. Our health outcomes have been declining for decades in the United States. We have, incredibly high rates of obesity, diabetes, heart disease. These are all mostly lifestyle diseases attributed to our diet. And what we want people to understand is that our industrial food system and farming has, as we've gone down that path, it's really mirrored our declining health as a nation. And today we, spend the least amount on food as a country that we have since the 1960s, but now the most on healthcare. So as we've kind of led this push for cheap industrial chemical food, we're really paying for that with our health outcomes. And we want to push people to think about an idea actually of regenerative healthcare, that the food we produce needs to be part of our conversation around health. And ultimately, we really need, as Americans, to be incentivizing our farmers to grow more fruits, vegetables, nuts, that we need to be incentivizing that not just what we eat, but how it's produced, incentivizing food that's free of toxic chemicals. And we need to be incentivizing that food to be accessible as part of our solution to the healthcare epidemic we're having in this country.
It's funny, those calculations of we're paying the least amount for food and the most amount for healthcare. I don't know if there are numbers or projections on this, but if we were to pay more for food, would we save that much more and then some on healthcare?
Yeah, that's a conversation we really would like to bring to the national stage. A lot of times people talk to us about, the price of organic food is prohibitive for a lot of families. And I think that's a conversation we need to be having as a country, that what is the true cost of food? it's not just the cost that you see at the grocery store checkout. You're paying for that food in so many other ways, in your health care, in farm subsidies. A lot of times that conventional food, we're paying for it through our tax dollars in the way of farm subsidies that we don't calculate when we think about that grocery store checkout. We're also paying for it in our environmental outcomes. So, every year when, as we poison and degrade our soil, our air, our water, as we actually pay to do things like dredge the Mississippi because there's so much soil erosion, those are all, at the end of the day, the true cost of this cheap food. So I think there's so many ways that we could incentivize, pay that higher price of food that benefits the farmer, get more of those dollars benefiting the farmer, benefiting our local economies, benefiting resilient agriculture and healthy food systems, rather than paying for it in our healthcare costs. Because healthcare cost is right, it's more than just money. When people have these diabetes and heart disease and cancers and obesity, it's also quality of life. So can we think about a more holistic system where we're investing in feeling better and having better food rather than the spiraling costs to treat these lifestyle diseases?
You're listening to Down to Earth, and we're just going to take a little quick break to tell you two things. First, the Quivira Coalition's new agrarian apprenticeship program is leading a free Intro to Mentoring workshop hosted by Zoom on Wednesday, July 22nd from 6:30 to 8 Mountain Time. Led by NAP's founding mentor, Julie Sullivan, the call will introduce the new agrarian program and what it takes to become a mentor. The call is free and open to anyone who's curious to learn more about mentoring new agrarians. For more information and to register, either email newagrarian@quiviracoalition.org or visit quiviracoalition.org/mentor-101. And one more thing for fans of this program. We have just started a Patreon page, which you can find at patreon.com/down-to-earth-planet-to-plate. Patreon is spelled Patreon, so patreon.com/down-to-earth-planet-to-plate. And for a low monthly donation, you can support this show and get some thank you gifts for your support. It's easy, it doesn't take a big chunk out of your budget, and it helps this show to survive and thrive. And we want to thank our first patrons, Grassberger and Hannah Gosnell. Thank you both so much. And now back to our program. Tell us more about the Rodale Institute and its founder, J.I. Rodale. He started studying organic agriculture in the 1940s, which seems like a long time ago to be conceiving of that work. What brought him to it?
He was definitely a pioneer. J.I. Rodale, he actually wasn't a farmer. He grew up in New York City, and he started an electrical manufacturing company with his brother. So that was actually sort of what his business was. And during, World War II, they were manufacturing a lot of things for the war effort. So they actually moved their company out of New York City to Pennsylvania, where they would have a little bit more room to expand. And at that time, J.I. was really interested. He wanted to move onto a farm because he wanted to produce healthy food for his family. So he called up, which in our local extension, which in our area would be Penn State, and basically asked, how do I go about growing this food? And they started telling him about chemicals that he would need to use, fertilizers for his farm. And I think as an outsider, someone who wasn't in farming, it just didn't make sense to him. He said, how can I turn these toxic chemicals into healthy food for my family? So this was just the start of the Green Revolution. A lot of people don't know the connection between our sort of military industrial complex and today's chemical agriculture. But coming out of World War II, when we were using a lot of chemicals in the war effort, when the war ended, those companies were trying to figure out what's our next move? What do we do with all of our production? And they figured out that they could turn a lot of chemicals that they used in the war into chemicals for agriculture. So we started spreading our fertilizers, our petroleum-based that we started using in agriculture. We started using pesticides that actually had a root in the war effort, things like DDT, things that were, Agent Orange in the war. And this was all happening in, the 1940s, and J.I. Rodale just said, this doesn't make sense that we can use these toxic chemicals to make healthy food. So he started experimenting with that on his own farm, and he actually wanted to pay other universities to study. He wanted to know, what are the long-term effects going to be of these chemicals on our diet? And the universities wouldn't take his money. They really felt like, this is modern agriculture, this is the future of farming. So he decided, if no one will take my money, then I'm going to start it on my own, study it on my own. And that's how he started the Rodale Institute, really on his own farm, and started to research, started to try things, and really actually kind of grew the organic movement because he was a writer and he wrote publications like Pay Dirt. He started a magazine many people know, Organic Gardening Magazine. And this was kind of how the organic movement was born, just by inspiring other people to try things at home, to start composting, to start gardening, to write letters to the editors, to their local newspaper. And he really started this movement, and it actually has taken, a lot of it was, home gardeners, and it's taken time to put the real good science behind it that we do today. And now we have, many decades of really solid scientific research about how farmers can deal with pests and disease and weeds without using those chemicals, and also understanding his original question, what are the long-term effects of those chemicals? So J.I. really, he was a pioneer, and back in the 1940s, he wrote our motto, which we still use today, which is healthy soil equals healthy food equals healthy people. And I think we've really proven that over the last 70 years.
One of the things that I think of when you're speaking is that the detrimental health effects of chemical intensive agriculture is not only on the people who are eating it, but on the farmers themselves. Is that something that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, there's so many intersections with food and health. I think a lot of people on the consumer side, they buy organic because they're concerned about pesticide residues, the actual pesticides on the food that they eat, or they're concerned about GMOs. And they really don't even understand all the other ways that these toxic farming chemicals are impacting them. We're finding that chemicals are in the water that we drink. So we're getting exposed to chemicals, for example, like atrazine, which we know has, in other animals like frogs, it actually effeminizes frogs. So we see the effects that these chemicals are having on other species, but we're just blanket saying that they're okay for people. We see these chemicals actually impact our air quality, the air that we breathe. And they disproportionately, as you mentioned, affect our farm workers who are in close proximity with these chemicals on a regular basis, to the point that the lymphomas, like Hodgkin's lymphoma, it's known as the farmer's cancer because it's so prevalent in our farming communities. And, that's finally coming to light really in our legal system. You may have seen that just recently, Bayer actually settled a lawsuit for over $10 billion for the number of complaints that have come about for their product Roundup, and the main ingredient in that is glyphosate, which is an herbicide, has caused so many people to get cancer that they finally made a $10 billion settlement to that lawsuit. So yeah, these are things that we're interested in. It's definitely, we're trying to get people to understand what you eat affects your health, but it's not just if you eat an apple or chips, that definitely affects your health. It also depends how that apple was produced. So that's kind of the next level of this conversation for people to understand that your health is more than just your diet. Your health is all of these other ways that these pervasive chemicals are affecting our everyday lives.
Yeah, I mean, you could do so many comparisons of an apple produced one way and an apple produced another way, and you put them on a table and they look the same, or a pound of ground beef produced in a regenerative meat production operation versus a kind of CAFO operation with all kinds of hormones and antibiotics and so on, they look the same. They're very different in so many ways.
Oh, that's another great point, is this idea of antibiotic resistance. That's something we're trying to educate more people on, that, you know, the way that we do produce the majority of livestock in this country in this industrial CAFO setting, those animals, because they're so crowded and so stressed, they are just routinely given antibiotics to prevent disease, to the point that now over 70% of our antibiotics globally are going to livestock, not to humans. And that is starting to cause antibiotic resistance in humans. So the meat that we eat is exposing us to antibiotics so often that when we are sick and if we need antibiotics, that they're not working. So that's another great way for people, we need to make more intersections between agriculture and food and, you know, our medical system and health. And I think those two industries, they're so massive and they just have really gotten so separated. You know, our healthcare is all about specialization to the point that, you know, medical doctors only receive 25 hours of nutrition education. So I like to think back to the phrase that you learned maybe back in elementary school, that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, that, you know, food was always supposed to be medicine and part of our health, but those two industries have really gotten separated.
The Rodale Institute now has farms not only in Pennsylvania, which is where historically you guys have been working, but also in a couple of different states. What are you doing and what is that expansion about?
Yeah, so we are headquartered in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and we have a couple partner farms in the Pennsylvania area. But we recently have started what we're calling regional resource centers. So they're satellite campuses of Rodale Institute in other parts of the country. So we have the California Organic Center, which is located in Ventura County, California, the Midwest Organic Center, which is in Marion, Iowa, and the Southeast Organic Center, which is just outside of Atlanta in Chattahoochee Hills, Georgia. So these are new outposts of the Rodale Institute, and they really will serve a couple goals. One is more regionalized research. We know that, you know, organic research is still critically underfunded, and there's just a lot more research that needs to be done, and it's so important in organic, right? Where conventional chemical agriculture is all about chemistry. Organic agriculture is all about biology, which varies from place to place. You have to consider your crops, your climate, your soils, your pests, and to really farm with nature, you have to come up with regionalized solutions. So we're going to be on the ground in these communities performing research on how farmers in those areas can tackle things like pest, disease, weeds, you know, fertility, all of these issues that we need to think about in organic. So we're doing that research, and then we really want to act as a resource for farmers in those communities. So we're going to be able to be a hub where farmers can come for field days, education, even have local consultants that can come and work with them one-on-one on their farm, for example, if they want to transition to organic. So almost like an extension hub that is specifically focused on organic agriculture and solutions for farmers.
So it's really kind of an extension alternative.
Yeah, one thing that is exciting is there's more and more universities who are embracing organic agriculture, who are making it a priority to research, who are training more extension agents on organic agriculture. But there's definitely still a need. We talk with farmers all the time, and you know, there's challenges to transitioning to regenerative and organic agriculture. Some of those challenges are just true infrastructure things like not having access to a certified organic grain mill, for example. Or, some of the challenges are the 3-year transition period to organic. But some of the challenges that farmers face are education. A lot of farmers, they still rely on the people who are selling them inputs are the number one person that they consult for questions about their farm. So they're used to talking to their seed salesperson or whoever does their pesticide and spraying regimen on their farm. And they don't feel, often farmers are pressured from the people who sell those inputs that they need these inputs, and if they don't use them, it's going to be a lot of risk and they're going to not have the yields and they're going to lose their crop. And those are really scary conversations to have when every year in the beginning of the season you have to go to the bank, take out a loan, and you have to be able to pay it back at the end of the year. So no farmer wants to risk their crop. So I think for a lot of farmers, they want to be able to talk to another source, someone who has experience in moving off of inputs. How can they do that in a way that's not going to affect their yields? And then what does the big picture look like? How can they farm in a way that's using cover crops for fertility? What kind of weed management plan, crop rotation plan? So there's definitely a need for education when you're moving to these type of practices, and you want to know that you're getting that information from an unbiased source that's experienced in organic agriculture, who can really be a mentor, but who's also doing the research themselves so they know what works and what doesn't work.
And so that's what you're there to provide.
Yeah, and we're really excited to be in all of those areas. I personally was thrilled when we could open the center in Iowa, since that's sort of, the belly of the beast of conventional ag. I think we'll be able to be a huge resource for especially grain farmers in Iowa. California is a leader in organic agriculture. They actually are number one in the country for organic sales. There are a lot of organic farms in California. They have different challenges in California with things like access to water, for example, which is a really prized resource. Farmland is very expensive in a lot of areas of California, so that impacts solutions that farmers need. And then to go into Georgia is, it's a totally different scenario where actually the southeast part of our country is the lowest right now for organic production. The entire state of Georgia only has, just around 100 certified organic farms. And for us to be in an area like that where we can really start to grow organic production and the resources and education and research. So each regional resource center will have a little bit of a different focus to respond to the farmers in that region.
The terms regenerative and organic and sustainable, these are all things that are going around, and for a lot of people are new, for a lot of people they're not. But in order to understand those terms and in order to have the public be able to make sense of them, especially when they go into the grocery store, what's a consumer to do? I mean, we've got organic, but we don't really yet have a regenerative label on the food. Or do we? Is that coming?
Yeah, so it's really interesting that regenerative is becoming such a buzzword in agriculture. I think it's really exciting. But regenerative, it's actually something we've been talking about since the 70s and 80s. Our founder's son, Bob Rodale, he was one of the early people to start putting the word regenerative with agriculture. And one of the reasons he felt like we needed a new term in farming, because he felt that at the time sustainable was really the main buzzword. And he felt that sustainable wasn't good enough, that we can't continue to degenerate our soils through industrial chemical agriculture, but we really can't just sustain what we're doing now. What we're doing now, it's not good enough. We need to actually regenerate, which for us means improving the resources as we farm them. And Bob Rodale, he talked about the idea of regenerative agriculture as being more than just how we treat the land, but that ultimately true regenerative agriculture could regenerate our soils, but also our communities and even the human spirit. That's what he really felt that regenerative agriculture meant. And, fast forward to today, regenerative is becoming a really popular term. And I think, that people are using it a little bit differently, but, all the people are talking about regenerative, what they have in common is it's really about soil health. So how can we use those good farming practices like cover cropping and crop rotation and getting animals outdoors grazing, reducing tillage and moving towards no-till practices, composting? How can we utilize those practices to improve soil health and ultimately sequester carbon and use these practices to start to mitigate and reverse climate change? So that, I think this movement is really exciting, and we felt pretty strongly at Rodale Institute that we don't want regenerative and organic to be competing movements. We think that they're really complementary, and at the end of the day, true organic farming is regenerative. And at the end of the day, to be truly regenerative, using inputs like glyphosate that are pervasive chemicals, it's not a regenerative practice because we know that that kills that healthy life in the soil. So we've been really excited. The last couple years, we've been working on a new initiative. It's actually a new certification, the Regenerative Organic Certification. It will be a label that will be on food and fiber products, just like you see that USDA certified organic label on products today. It's basically goes above and beyond the current requirements for organic. So the new Regenerative Organic Certification, it has 3 pillars. The first is soil health, the second is animal welfare, and the third is farm worker fairness. So as a baseline, you still have to meet the organic criteria, but it goes above and beyond by not allowing soilless systems like hydroponics, by requiring thresholds for the amount of time you cover crop, for example, for the amount of tillage you're able to incorporate on the farm. And it requires animals to be outdoors on pasture. And then it also requires that fair trade piece. So, harking back to what I mentioned about Bob Rodale, we always felt that it's more than about how we treat the land, and we need to care about the animals and the people who are part of a system to be truly regenerative. So that farm worker fairness piece allows us to make sure that the farmers and farm workers are getting paid a living wage, have safe working conditions, and a lot of other protections for the farmers. So that is a new label that will be on shelves, and it kind of is a one-stop shop that a consumer in a grocery store can take a look and say, I know that not only was this produced with the utmost care for the environment, not only is this a healthy product for my family, but I know that every living being, human, animal, even bacteria and fungi in the soil, were treated with care in this system.
When is that expected to go live, like to be on the shelves?
We actually just finished a pilot process for the Regenerative Organic Certification. We tested it on over 20 farms in 9 different countries because it's a global certification. And that pilot process is done. So there's the very first products are actually hitting shelves right now. You can buy a couple products from brands like Patagonia Provisions, from Nature's Path, Dr. Bronner's, brands like Grain Place Foods, and they have the first ROC products on the shelves. And now that we just finished that, we're opening up the certification to more farms and more brands. So in the future, that list will definitely grow.
One of the things that people complain about, especially now where income and wealth inequality in the United States is so staggering, is the kind of like class distinction, like who can afford to eat healthy food, to eat organic, regenerative organic. What is your vision for equalizing access to that, to healthy food?
I think we won't be satisfied as a movement of the organic movement until organic is accessible and affordable for every single family in this country and really around the world. That's the ultimate goal. And we did talk a little bit earlier about the true price of food and how in a lot of ways our conventional and processed foods are heavily subsidized by the government and by the taxpayer. And we'd like to see a shift so that we're subsidizing fresh, healthy, local, organic food for families. So I think some of that comes down to policy. But a couple tips and ways that we've kind of are working on that as an organization. We encourage people, for example, to think about their food dollars, to buy more whole foods like fruits and vegetables. We try to tell people, less meat, better meat is a strategy you could think about with your family, that maybe you don't need to eat meat every meal, but when you do eat meat, look for the organic, grass-fed, regenerative, where it's healthier for you and for the planet. And that really stretches your food dollars and makes them go further. We encourage people to join a CSA where you can get, a large portion of organic produce every week at an affordable rate. I even tell people to look for there's an emerging trend in grocery stores with kind of the ugly produce. Buy that ugly produce if it's organic. But there's a lot of food waste in this country because consumers have indicated they only want to buy this kind of perfect produce. So, let our stores know that we're willing to embrace that imperfect produce. Actually, a lot of the imperfect produce is healthier for you. The little stress that it's gone through a lot of times makes it develop more vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. And we also encourage people to grow their own. So I think those are some strategies for making organic more affordable. But an example, we actually have a program at Rodale Institute in our local community that's focused on food access. So we have a program, our CSA that we operate, we deliver to food deserts. Some people are using now the term food apartheid instead of food deserts. But we bring our CSA share to families who typically don't have a lot of access to fresh organic food. We bring it there every week, and we allow them to pay week to week, which a lot of CSAs make you pay up front, which is prohibitive for low-income families. And we allow them to pay with their SNAP benefits, their federal food assistance dollars. And anyone who uses SNAP pays half the rate, and that's subsidized by families who can pay the full rate for the CSA. So I think strategies like that, to think about what can we do more in local communities to make sure that food is accessible and affordable, is really important to our movement. And organic food cannot be just for wealthy people who can shop at a farmer's market. Our most vulnerable populations are the people who need the healthiest food. So I think that is really a key to the success of our movement.
If people want to find out more about the Rodale Institute, want to get involved, want to learn more, how can they do so?
So one of the ways that we've innovated this year as an organization in response to coronavirus is by moving a lot of our educational programming online. So if you visit us at rodaleinstitute.org, you can get access to webinars, workshops, panels. We have actually a lot of free resources as well for people who even just want to try backyard composting. So definitely check out our website. You can sign up for our email list or follow us on social media. But we have a lot of great education resources online. And for those of you who do live closer to one of our sites in maybe Pennsylvania or even our new sites in Iowa, California, or Georgia, there are opportunities to attend events. And at our headquarters in Pennsylvania, we typically, on a typical year, we see about 20,000 visitors. So our farm is open to the public. We have a visitor center. We even have a free walking tour, audio tour of the farm. So we definitely invite you to visit us, whether that's in person or online, and either learn more if you're a farmer about incorporating organic practices on your farm. We even have a consulting service that we can work one-on-one with farmers who want to transition to organic. Or if you're more involved in research, policy, or you're just a consumer who wants to learn more about where your food comes from, we have a lot of great resources for you and just invite you to be part of our movement. We truly feel that the future of farming is regenerative and organic.
Rodale Institute is on the web at rodaleinstitute.org, Rodale. Anything else you want to add?
Additionally, July 13th through 17th is Rodale Institute's first ever virtual field day. You can tune in at rodaleinstitute.org/field day. It's only $25 to register, and you can view over 15 stations on our farm, video presentations, learning about things like composting, cover cropping, organic no-till, grafting tomatoes, all kinds of different topics. And if you tune in during the week of July 13th through 17th, there's also some live Q&A sessions that are interactive. You can ask questions from our researchers and our farmers. So definitely check out our first ever virtual field day. Lots of amazing access to our research and our experimental farm. And again, you can find that at rodaleinstitute.org/field day. Hope you can join us.
Dianna Martin is Director of Communications and Marketing at Rodale Institute. Thank you so much for being with us here on Down to Earth.
Thank you so much for having us, and to all the farmers listening, thank you for what you do to produce food for our country.
This program is produced in collaboration with the Quivira Coalition, a non-for-profit educational organization and community network of ranchers, farmers, conservationists, scientists, educators, and many others dedicated to the resilience of arid working lands. Their work aims to shift current practices of agriculture and land stewardship to those that produce good food, support meaningful livelihoods in rural places, sustain biodiversity, and remedy the impacts of climate change. To learn more about Quivira and how you can support their work, visit quiviracoalition.org, Quivira, coalition.org. You've been listening to Down to Earth, a production of the Quivira Coalition and the Radio Cafe. I'm your host, Mary Charlotte Domandi. If you like this program, please share it with your network. And we'd love your feedback. Go to downtoearth.media, where you can contact us and you can sign up for the mailing list. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. We're producing this show bi-weekly and would love your comments and ideas, so once again, downtoearth.media, and check out the Quivira Coalition, quiviracoalition.org, that's Quivira. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.